Welcome back. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic state visit to the United States has begun a short while ago. He landed in New York, and shortly before leaving for his hotel, he was, of course, greeted by a large contingent of members of the Indian diaspora who were out there to receive him. This has, of course, been a routine sight in different parts of the world that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has travelled to. Members of the Indian diaspora always, of course, waiting in anticipation and giving him a grand reception everywhere that he's travelled, and that's of course a sight that has become all too familiar for us who of course covered his visits to the United States as well in the past, starting from the end of 2014 where he first made his visit there as the Prime Minister of India. 9 years down the road, he's back in the United States, this time on an official state visit, which of course comes with its own series of protocols and rituals, and gives us an indication of the extent to which the ties between India and the United States have not only deepened, but also of course enjoy a distinct standing now than they perhaps might have in the past. Let's in fact go across to New York, where we're getting reactions from members of the Indian diaspora who welcomed Prime Minister Modi.
But I'm just excited that he's here and in America. It's really cool. I think it's very powerful and very strong of him to come here and kind of see the support that he has in America along with other countries worldwide, and I think it's going to be a very big movement for him to come here. Just that I support him and that he's doing a really good job.
It's the 20th of June, and we're here at the New York Palace to welcome Narendra Modi ji to New York City. We brought a few of the kids from middle school over here.
Yeah, we're really excited to see Narendra Modi ji, and it's going to be an amazing experience to finally meet him.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing to finally see Narendra Modi ji, and we're going to see him talk about all the technological advances in India. So it's going to be amazing.
And we'll be able to see all the fascinating parts of government.
I think it's very important that he's visiting here, and he will be with Biden, and we are all going to the Washington DC. I think it's a great, it will make a great impact on in US also, as he's doing really great job globally as well, and he's helping out the actually whole world, you know, with his nice karma and his nice heart, and he's making India very proud.
Well, let me also go across to my colleague Rishabh. Rishabh, Prime Minister Modi did land a short while ago. There are, of course, Indians, members of the diaspora waiting for him outside the hotel for his arrival. And he has a series of important engagements that have been lined up for him later in the day. Tell us about the kind of people he's expected to meet. And this is all, of course, also in the build-up to International Yoga Day tomorrow.
Definitely, if you see minute after minute, every minute that Prime Minister will be staying in the United States, his schedule is jam-packed. There are right now 10 CEOs already waiting for Prime Minister in New York. He has just landed, has moved to the hotel where he'll be there for next 3 hours. He'll be briefed by the Indian Ambassador to the United States, Mr. Sandhu, as well as India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ruchira Kamboj. Both these officials will brief Prime Minister Narendra Modi about who all he's meeting, what's on agenda, and how and what lies ahead in New York, at least in the first leg of the state visit. Remember, he was scheduled to leave for Washington, D.C. just after the Yoga Day celebration, but then the diaspora came together, kept writing letters to PMO, and the Prime Minister had to oblige, and now he'll be staying 2 hours extra in New York just to meet the representatives of diaspora in New York as well. A diaspora event is already scheduled in Washington, D.C., but in New York as well. Prime Minister would be meeting the Indian diaspora after the Yoga Day celebration. So this shows that the euphoria around Prime Minister's visit, the excitement among diaspora. Remember, US has 4.6 million strong Indian diaspora. This diaspora has added significantly to the economy, not only of US but even India, and that shows the connect between India and US. So a jam-packed next 24 hours for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, where he'll be meeting CEOs, attending and leading the International Yoga Day at UN headquarters in New York, and then meeting the representatives of Indian Diaspora before he leaves for Washington, D.C.
All right, let me just interrupt you there for a moment, Rishabh, because we're also being joined by author and columnist Kartikeya Tanna for his perspective on this historic visit. Mr. Tanna, thank you for joining us. What are your expectations and what are some of the tangibles that hopefully will materialize during the course of this historic visit on the part of Prime Minister Modi to the United States?
Well, I think, if you remember Mr. Modi's initial utterances about foreign policy and, what we thought of foreign policy before Modi and after Modi. Before Modi, it was, thought about, improving India's image, improving India's goodwill, soft power. I'm not saying there's no soft power. There is soft power component, but it's a very small component of it. And what Modi said, what he focused on was that foreign policy these days has to be about trade and investment, securing those relationships with other countries. Everything else just rotates around them. And I think he's been proven right time and again in his assessment. People might have thought that, he's only focusing on money and trade and investment. But that is essentially what brings prosperity to both nations. So, for example, the U.S. wants India to have a deal for, the weapons, so. And then the Prime Minister wants to improve India and U.S. bilateral trade ties.
Yes.
And there's also this talk about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. So these are the focus areas that Mr. Modi and his government have consistently worked on in order to ensure that even the U.S. and India may not be uncompromised, unconditional allies in that sense, like, for example, the UK is of India. But at least India and US have so many shared values and interests that they can certainly leverage these things to the maximum capacity. And honestly, it's sky's the limit for that. They don't have to be aligned, so India is in a sense non-aligned. So the two countries don't have to be aligned on every matter, especially related to, other foreign powers, for example, Russia. The ongoing Russia war in Ukraine.
Yes.
Obviously, India's public stand is different from what the American public stand is. But that doesn't mean that you do not cooperate and even co-opete. I use the word co-opete as kind of a combination of compete and cooperate at the same time between India and US. So, and that's why his outreach to the CEOs of of major companies in America, essentially with the message that come invest in India, because in India you not only have an incredible market, a consumer market, but you also have infinite capacity of talent, skill, labor, and as well as good economic conditions for investment in business to thrive. And so I think his focus has been very clear, and since the day he took the Prime Minister's office, his focus has been extremely clear of how he wants to leverage this diplomacy and what he wants to focus on while engaging in diplomacy.
Absolutely. You touched upon a very important point there when you talked about the improvement in relations by way of trade between India and the United States.
Yes.
That's something that he emphasized in his interview to the Wall Street Journal as well, shortly before he left for New York, where he talked about the importance of the expansion of global supply chains as well. We'll come back to you, Mr. Tanna, but in the meantime, let's also, in fact, go across to my colleague, Sushant Sinha, who's been in the United States covering this historic visit on the part of Prime Minister Modi. And this is a ground report that he sent in from Times Square in New York.
His state visit in America is going to be a historic one. Not because it is important for India, but it is more important for America, which is struggling to revive from what happened here after COVID pandemic and what happened during Russia-Ukraine war. And if you talk about America, they are looking more eagerly to welcome Narendra Modi in Washington as well and sign some deals which are going to be a game changer, not for India but for America as well. And if you see, मैं इस वक्त यहाँ टाइम स्क्वायर पर हूँ और यहाँ पर सारी जगमगाहट जो है, लाइट्स हैं, बड़े बड़े स्क्रीन्स हैं, सब कुछ है, लोगों की भीड़ है, लेकिन अमेरिका में ये जो जगह चमचमा रही है वो चमचमाहट अर्थव्यवस्था में, इकोनॉमी में नहीं है। और इसीलिए महंगाई यहाँ पर बहुत है, बैंक्स बंद हो रहे हैं, यहाँ पर लोगों की नौकरियां जा रही हैं। और जो बाइडेन प्रशासन जो है वो इस बात पर निर्भर कर रहा है कि कैसे इंडिया के साथ, जो दुनिया में ब्राइट स्पॉट बना हुआ है, इंडिया विच इज लीडिंग द वर्ल्ड, should also collaborate with America, which will bring jobs here, which will help in easing inflation, which will help Joe Biden government, making sure that people see them as they delivered what they promised.
Mr. Tanna, coming back to you, you also touched upon the differences of opinion that we might have had with the United States when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Of course, there's a convergence there in terms of us wanting the war to end. But clearly, we have to, of course, rely on Russia to supply us large quantities of oil, something that is very much in our own national interest as far as our energy security is concerned. But do you see that as a sticky point between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden in how this relationship might evolve in the near future?
In a sense, US and India operate in exactly the same way. It is concerned with its self-interest first and foremost. And it's surprising that the US isn't honest about admitting to that, because India is. Mr. Jaishankar has consistently said that, look, I'm not, I have so many mouths to feed. I'm not going to go and buy the costliest oil just because you guys have a position on the Russia war. As a country, India doesn't. So again, US's decisions are also based on strategic self-interest. And there's a commonality there. But what the US also does is it tries to act as this caretaker and father of the world, in a sense, and which is why, they often sermonize, they often go into these, lectures that they give the whole world, including India. But I think kudos to Mr. Modi and his government for not buckling down to this enormous pressure, enormous public pressure that was put on it to condemn Russia, to break ties with Russia. And just recently, you might have seen on, there's an article about how Indian government's purchase of Russian oil effectively helped stabilize the oil prices in the global market. So in a sense, the EU and the US have to thank India, and by India, I mean the Modi government, for its decision on Russian oil, because of which, the oil prices haven't significantly skyrocketed in a way that's unaffordable for most people. So again, every country has to think about its self-interest. I mean, Mr. Modi is a prime minister of, he may be revered all around the world, and he is revered all around the world, but ultimately he is a prime minister of who? He's the prime minister of 140 crore Indians. So he has to think of the interest and the larger good of 140 crore Indians. And if it allies and merges with interest of the whole world at large, so be it. But where it does not, the choice is clear.
Mr. Tanna, speaking about trade, since that's an issue that you brought up in your first response, there was a trade deal that did not go through. Donald Trump, at the time that he was president of the United States, did express certain apprehensions about high Indian tariffs, almost like it was a complaint on his part. And then, of course, we've tried to bring about some kind of a resolution with respect to terms of trade with the United States that is also acceptable to us. However, there have been some glitches. For example, the generalized system of preference program, which has been revoked for India on the part of the Americans. So do you see some kind of a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of a favorable trade deal that we might strike with the United States?
Sorry, the audio wasn't as clear. I couldn't hear you, but what I understood you asking me is whether the issues or the friction that happened when President Trump was in power with India, whether you see them being ironed out now under President Biden.
Especially on issues of trade, yes.
Yes, I think so. I think so because President Trump had this very hard taskmaster approach. He's the art of the deal author, right? So his strategy always is to push the other person into a corner and then try to negotiate, something that he can take home with and he can brag about. But I think the US under President Biden is a little more measured. And I'm not saying it's President Biden who takes the decisions, but the people in his administration take the decisions, and they realize, as your anchor person just said, right now, that the US economy is in a very vulnerable state. I mean, it is still the largest economy in the world, no doubt. But there are many chinks in their armor, and the reason why they're courting India to this extent is because they realize that in order to prevent these holes in the boat, so-called, to prevent the ship from sailing because of these holes in the so-called boat called the U.S. economy, they need India to fill as many holes as possible. And therefore, I do see some rationality infusing back into these trade talks and other vital matters between U.S. and India, which earlier were a source of friction. Again, because of posturing. A lot of what President Trump was up to was, posturing, and we know that it's more than proven now. So hopefully this outreach with President Biden, and especially the personal touch that they are trying to give him, and also the opportunity they're giving him to address the joint session of the U.S. Congress. I think all of that taken together serves as an indication that the U.S. is serious about entering into good faith negotiations with India rather than being a bully and enforcing its writ first and then kind of trying to gain a victory out of it for PR purposes.
Let's also talk about China, Mr. Tanna, because if you talk about the bilateral trade between China and the United States, it's upwards of $600 billion US, which is several times that of the bilateral trade between India and the United States. Many believe that India and the US have not really lived up to their potential as far as bilateral trade is concerned. Do you honestly believe that the United States sees India as a possible substitute to China in that regard? Can we emerge as some kind of a manufacturing force that China has been for all this while, and perhaps even supplant China in the future? Does the United States really look to India as that kind of an alternative?
Well, I don't think so, at least not right now. And the reason for that is because, China has had a head start. China and U.S. relationships started decades ago, whereas India was still, under this socialist economy mindset, where profit is bad. We weren't encouraging companies. Our liberalization only happened in the early 90s, and it took several years as gestation period, for our companies to actually start competing in the market. Having said that, what we have achieved in terms of many major companies trying to shift the components of their business, components of their production. For example, Apple in India, examples like that, even car companies in India. Those small components that are slowly being shifted, and it especially happened after COVID, where the US is beginning to show a little bit of distrust towards China. And that's apparent from many statements that President Biden has made and members of his administration have made. It is a golden opportunity for India to prove that it has consistent laws and regulations enforced in a consistent way, without any knee-jerk reactions, without any discriminatory approach of any kind. Let's make this a rule-based industrial law and order system, and let's basically take advantage of the overall increasing distrust that not just the US, but also European Union is beginning to have towards China. So it's not yet a replacement. Can it be a replacement at some point of time in the future? Absolutely, yes. But for that, India has the onus to play, and India has to convince the US, which is why I believe Mr. Modi is one of the items on his agenda in his meetings with the CEOs is essentially that I promise you, because I am in power, I'm the prime minister, I have, my party has a majority, so we have a stable government. I promise you a fair, rules-based, robust system. Come to India and put your money, and I want you to put your money where your mouth is, and I am going to guarantee a stable
Okay.
investment climate for your investment.
Okay, Mr. Tanna, please stay with us. We also have Mr. Brahma Chelani, strategic affairs expert, joining us. But before we go to Mr. Chelani, here's a report that's also been filed by our colleague Malvika from outside the airport when Prime Minister Modi just landed a short while ago in New York.
Prime Minister Modi has arrived in the US. He is in New York right now, and he will be meeting with thought leaders and Nobel laureates later in the evening. Tomorrow, he will be attending the Yoga Day celebrations at the UN headquarters. Thereafter, he will be traveling to Washington, D.C., where he's scheduled to meet with corporate leaders and attend a private dinner at the White House. Later in the day, the next morning, the Prime Minister will be welcomed at the White House through a ceremonial reception, and he is then going to be meeting with corporate leaders, with the State Department, addressing a joint meeting of the US Congress. He is also scheduled to meet with the Indian diaspora. There are high expectations from Prime Minister Modi's visit. I'm at a press conference that was conducted by the US State Department. John Kirby, the coordinator for strategic communications in the US, he said that the US is keenly looking forward to various announcements and concrete developments are likely to emerge from Prime Minister's meeting. He said that the US government's focus will be on the future of this cooperation and that it sees India as a strategic partner, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but as a global leader. John Kirby also said that the US sees India's potential role as a mediator in Ukraine, and it's up to the country to decide what kind of role it wants to play.
We also have Mr. Brahma Chelani joining us. Mr. Chelani, thank you for speaking to Times Now. The tour or the historic visit of Prime Minister Modi concludes on the 23rd of June. And by the time the joint declaration from both sides is actually out, what is it in the fine print that you'd like to actually see in terms of takeaways and tangibles as far as our strategic relationship with the United States is concerned, sir?
The Biden administration has billed Modi's visit as a transformative visit. The way the US government has hyped this visit underscores the importance it lays to this visit. So it's very interesting that the US government itself has raised expectations from this visit. The issue is, what results will this visit produce? The results in terms of deals, we already know there'll be a couple of major defense deals, but will the results be in terms of charting a clear direction for the bilateral relationship, especially in key areas, whether they extend from semiconductor supplies to defense cooperation to cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region? Remains to be seen, but definitely the Biden administration is putting a lot of emphasis on this visit, expecting it to produce results that are going to be fundamental to charting a more closer direction for this bilateral relationship. The fact is that a China-Russia alliance is America's strategic nightmare. But unfortunately for American policymakers, US policy itself is pushing Russia and China closer together. The sanctions against Russia are forcing Russia to pivot to China. And that makes India, the third giant, even more important for US policy. US policy wants to ensure that America co-opts India rather than India staying neutral. In a way, even if India were to tilt towards the West while still remaining neutral or independent, even that would, for American policy, be an important success. So the idea is to co-opt India in a soft alliance, an alliance that does not require any treaty, because America's allies are all tied to Washington by treaties. Bilateral treaty relationships are the bedrock of America's alliance system. But with India, the US cannot even think of having a treaty, because India values its strategic autonomy. And therefore, the only thing that the US can think of is to bring India within its orbit of close partners through a soft alliance that requires no treaty. So the expectation in Washington is that Modi's visit is going to provide the direction towards that goal, towards achieving that goal. The visit itself may not mean that American policy has managed to co-opt India as a close partner, but that this visit will pave the way to building this kind of soft alliance that the US desires with India.
And does India desire that kind of an alliance? Will we read those signals on the part of the United States, and how will we respond to them? That's the moot question, Mr. Chelani. Let me, in fact, go across to my colleague Kitty as well, because Prime Minister Narendra Modi, shortly after having landed in New York, has now put out a tweet about his engagements that await him over the course of the next couple of days while he's in New York. So let me, in fact, go across to Kitty immediately. Yes, Kitty, take us through what the Prime Minister has just tweeted.
Well, Siddharth, this is a tweet that has been put out by Prime Minister Narendra Modi just a while back. We know he's landed in New York City, and he's put it out there. Landed in New York City, looking forward to the programs here, including interaction with thought leaders and the Yoga Day program tomorrow. That is on 21st June. And he's put out some photographs also. We've been playing out these photographs and, reactions that have been coming in from the Indian diaspora. So much excitement, euphoria among the Indian diaspora in the US, in New York City, especially at the moment. A lot of people, as we understand, have gathered outside the hotel where Prime Minister Modi is going to be residing tonight. And Prime Minister Modi says that, as we very well know, tomorrow is International Yoga Day. And so the program that has been, that is going to take place tomorrow on 21st of June, he's going to be participating in that, and he's also going to be interacting with business leaders tomorrow.
Well, let me, in fact, go across immediately to Mr. Shri Thanedar as well, US Congressman. Mr. Thanedar, thank you for speaking to Times Now. Tell us about your expectations. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has landed now in the United States. A series of engagements now await him. What are you hoping are the key takeaways from this historic visit on the part of the Prime Minister, sir?
Well, there is a lot of excitement. And this is a time to build a lasting relationship between the oldest democracy and the largest democracy. And I'm looking forward to collaboration in defense, in technology, in medicine, in education, in space technology. There is so much that these two countries can come to do together. So it's very, very important that that Prime Minister Modi and President Biden have a heart-to-heart conversation, meeting of minds on these important issues.
Mr. Thanedar, you trace your roots to Belgaum in Karnataka, then you, of course, moved to the United States. Grew from humble beginnings, and now you're a congressman in the United States. Tell us about how you've seen the evolution of Indo-US ties and what makes this specific visit on the part of the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, different from the previous visits by other Prime Ministers in the past, sir.
Well, again, I grew up in poverty. 24 years I lived in India. I came to the United States to pursue my PhD. And my student visa was denied 4 times before finally I was given a student visa to come to this country. So, I speak fluent Marathi, I speak Kannada, I of course speak Hindi. I'll be speaking with the Prime Minister in Hindi and Marathi, because Prime Minister Modi speaks very well Marathi. So when I meet him, but from my humble beginning in Belagavi in Karnataka, to now I have been asked by the House US Congress leadership to escort Mr. Modi when he addresses the joint session of US Congress. So I am honored to be able to do that, and I want to do everything possible to build long-lasting friendship relationship between these two great countries.
Mr. Thanedar, you're a congressman, and yes, you did rightly mention the fact that Prime Minister Modi only becomes the fourth international leader to be addressing a joint session of the US Congress twice. Tell us about what the murmurs are in the corridors of power in the United States about the expectations that American lawmakers have about the issues that the Prime Minister may touch upon when he addresses the US Congress.
Well, we are looking for an alignment. We're looking for an ally. We're looking for a friend and a strong relationship. India has practiced non-alignment for decades, and Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, the dictatorship in Russia, China and Russia colluding, coming together. There are lots of issues that India, we would appeal to the Prime Minister to consider a much more aligned position with the United States so we can accomplish a lot. China has its aggression against India on its northern borders. China has practiced unfair trade practices. China has practiced unfair labor practices. It is important that for the sake of the India-Pacific region, Indian Ocean region, to have that stability, for that peace, for that, we need to really stop China's aggression, and that can only be done through a very, very strong relationship between these two great nations.
Mr. Thanedar, as far as bilateral trade between the Americans and the Chinese are concerned, it's almost in the range of $600 billion US, which is several times the bilateral trade between India and the United States. You've talked about Chinese expansionism, Chinese aggression. How much of this criticism against China on the part of the US will actually translate into tangible trade relations and enhancement of trade relations with India, and simultaneously a reevaluation of the trade ties that the Americans share with the Chinese?
Well, this is very important, and we have seen currently the supply chain disruption since COVID. We've seen the shortage of chips, and if India can be an economic partner in a much more robust way than what we have seen in the history, that would be mutually beneficial for the United States as well as India. India has huge potential, has a number of a high degree of young people in India, a great level of technology that exists, and manufacturing skills. And India certainly can compete significantly with China in terms of technology, in terms of manufacturing, and this will be a good way to challenge China's behavior, China's aggression, its colluding with dictatorial Russia. India and United States can be a significant answer to the China-Russia dictatorial practices and unfair trade practices.
You talked about Putin's leadership in Russia. You also talked about Russian aggression against Ukraine. However, India and the United States have a slightly divergent point of view with respect to ties with Russia. We have our own energy security to safeguard, and therefore we are procuring oil from Russia at significantly cheaper prices to take care of our population here. Does America appreciate Indian concerns on this matter? And do you see this divergence as a roadblock for the evolution of ties, or do you think we'll be able to overcome this?
It's not a roadblock. You know, this is between friends. We should be able to bring up uncomfortable issues between friendship and between these open and straightforward negotiations and conversations between these two great leaders. Issues will come up, and we may not agree on all of those issues. But this is certainly a time to bring up the concerns that United States have against India, and vice versa. If India has concerns about United States, I'm sure Prime Minister Modi will bring that out as well. And this is the time for us to talk heart to heart. But in the end of this meeting and end of this visit, we want to be assured that we have a strong relationship between these two great countries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thanedar, for speaking to us. And of course, I'm sure you'll be looking forward to the Prime Minister's meeting with you when you escort him as well. And we wish you all the best. And yes, we expect this to be a free and frank exchange of views between these two leaders. Let's also once again listen in to the kind of reactions that Prime Minister Narendra Modi received upon his landing in New York on the part of members of the Indian diaspora who were eagerly waiting for his arrival.
But I'm just excited that he's here and in America. It's really cool. I think it's very powerful and very strong of him to come here and like kind of see the support that he has in America along with other countries worldwide. And I think it's going to be a very big movement for him to come here. Just that I support him and that he's doing a really good job.
It's the 20th of June and we're here at the New York Palace to welcome Narendra Modi ji to New York City. We brought a few of the kids from middle school over here.
Yeah, we're really excited to see Narendra Modi ji, and it's going to be an amazing experience to finally meet him.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing to finally see him and we're going to see talk about all the technological advances in India. So it's going to be amazing.
And we'll be able to see all the fascinating parts of government.
We'll just have to slip into a very short break for the time being. We have a lot more lined up for you on the other side about the Prime Minister's visit to the United States. Stay tuned. Well, we continue to track all the updates about the Prime Minister's historic visit to the United States. He landed in New York about half an hour ago, and now, of course, he's proceeding to his hotel, and shortly after that, there have been a series of engagements that have been lined up for him for the rest of his stay today in New York. We are also joined by two guests. Mr. Chirayu Thakkar, Foreign Affairs expert, is with us, as is Mr. Saurabh Shukla of the newsmobile.in. Mr. Shukla, coming to you first. Shortly before the Prime Minister left for New York, you did anchor an ambassadors roundtable. Tell us about American expectations from the Prime Minister's visit, sir. Mr. Saurabh Shukla, if you can hear me, you hosted an ambassadors roundtable not very long ago, shortly before Prime Minister Modi arrived in New York. What have you managed to gauge so far about American expectations from the Prime Minister's visit? Well, let me in fact go across to Mr. Chirayu Thakkar. We'll try to connect once again with Mr. Saurabh Shukla. Mr. Thakkar, thank you so much for speaking to Times Now. What do you think are some of the key tangibles that India will hope to achieve at the conclusion of this visit on the 23rd?
Thank you so much for having me. I think there are a range of deliverables that are already out there and engaging from media and what is being printed. There is a huge hype about the GE 414 engines. There are talk about other critical technologies. There are talks about aligning of several norms and other business-related barriers. Both sides are trying to cut down barriers and progress gradually, one step at a time towards the bilateral trade deal, etc. But if I would to put it, I am not going to put it this in a very transactional terms. Although tangibles do matter in such kind of state visits, but it's not merely the tangibles. It is the trust that both sides are demonstrating. That is, I think, very much important. And that is happening here right now. And it is in this context that this state visit should be seen and not just tangibles, which are, of course, important.
Mr. Thakkar, we'll come back to you, but we're also being joined right now by the first Indian-American senator in the New York Senate, and his name's Kevin Thomas. Senator Thomas, thank you so much for speaking to Times Now. You'll, of course, be meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New York as well, and then, of course, he proceeds to Washington, where he'll address a joint session of the U.S. Congress. What are American lawmakers expecting Prime Minister Narendra Modi to say? What do they hope are the issues that he'll speak about when he addresses the August institution?
Well, listen, we have a lot of hope and a lot of expectation because of our connection with India, right? We want to make sure that there is a shared commitment across the region for global challenges like promoting health security, working with partners around the world to build a free, open, and secure, prosperous Indo-Pacific region, where goods and ideas can travel freely and rules are applied fairly. So this is the kind of relationship that we are all looking to foster here.
Senator Thomas, as far as defense is concerned, people, of course, have been talking about the acquisition of the Predator drones. Now, this defense relationship between India and the US has deepened over time, has it not? What do you hope is more that can be achieved on this front when Prime Minister Modi meets President Biden?
Because of the Russia-Ukraine war, everyone around the world that has purchased Russian military equipment are scratching their heads. So this is a good deal to make. A good deal where India is signing, a much anticipated deal, a $3 billion deal with the United States for 31 Reaper armed drones. All right. And this is like the best of the best drones that India can purchase to protect its borders and its security. So this is huge.
And let's also talk about the Indo-Pacific and how our interests converge. Clearly, the allusion here is to Chinese expansionism. Tell us about how we might evolve something really workable between these two countries as far as the containment of the Chinese threat is concerned.
Absolutely. There are a lot of issues around that area. An aggressive country like China is trying to restrict, a lot of free-flowing ideas, a lot of trade in that area. So we need to have a good defensive pact, especially between two strong countries like the US and India, to make sure that area and that region is safe, secure, and free.
Now, Mr. Thomas, you've also, in fact, had interaction with state leaders in India. In February this year, you actually spoke to the Kerala Chief Minister, Mr. Pinarayi Vijayan, as well. So there are multiple layers to this interaction between India and the United States. It takes place at multiple levels as well. Tell us a bit more about that interaction.
Absolutely. As you know, my parents hail from the state of Kerala. So when I went for a visit in February, it was very nice to meet with the Chief Minister and talk about the issues that impact the lives of Keralites there. One being the high unemployment rate of, young adults there, and what can we do, as someone who is in power here in the US, what can I do to foster some positive impact? How can I help bring some tech companies over? I try to do as much as I can to make sure that we have a very good relationship with India and with anyone who wants to make things better for others.
Well, Senator Thomas, stay with us because we're getting reactions on the go after Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in New York just a while ago. Let's listen into how the Indian diaspora has been waiting in anticipation for his arrival.
But I'm just excited that he's here and in America. It's really cool. I think it's very powerful and very strong of him to come here and like kind of see the support that he has in America along with other countries worldwide. And I think it's going to be a very big movement for him to come here. Just that I support him and that he's doing a really good job.
Well, Senator Thomas, coming back to you, you've, of course, been tracking the reactions on the ground as well. But let me ask you about some sticky issues between the two countries. One, of course, is with respect to the visa delays that many people have actually complained about. So what's being done on that front to address the specific concern? And secondly, the other point of concern has been the revocation of trade benefits under the Generalized System of Preferences program in the year 2019. We're, of course, talking about a different dispensation that was in power in the United States at that point in time. How are the two countries planning to address these issues?
Absolutely. You know, for viewers in India, one of the biggest sticking points is, you know, when you apply for a visa and it takes over a year just to get an interview. Other countries around that region don't have this problem, and we need to fix that. We need to do something in order to expedite these visas, these tourist visas, these work visas, you know, these business visas that we have out there. We got to make sure it's working. We cannot have a backlog like this. And I'm sure the Prime Minister's visit to the White House will have a positive impact on reducing those wait times.
Senator Thomas, stay with us because we have some more reactions now from members of the Indian community about Prime Minister Modi's visit.
मारे न्यूयॉर्क में एक बार आवो रे मोदी मारे न्यूयॉर्क में एक बार आवजो रे मोदी मारा वाला वाला मोदी हमारे न्यूयॉर्क में एक बार आवो रे मोदी जी आपको मक्की की रोटी और साग पंजाब से खिलावजो रे मोदी जी आई एम सुमन थापर from Ludhiana, Punjab, and living in New York for a long time. Thank you.
See, this visit is really big for all the Indians because a nation is like a family and the Prime Minister is head of the family. And we are blessed to have him as the Prime Minister because being him as the Prime Minister, India is growing and India is having more, you know, prestige, success, and the world is now doing acknowledgement of India's progress.
Well, let me also take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Saurabh Shukla of newsmobile.in on our broadcast. Good morning to you there, Mr. Shukla. Let me, in fact, begin by asking you, you hosted an ambassadors roundtable not too long ago before Prime Minister Modi landed in New York. Give us a perspective, sir, on American expectations, especially in political circles, from this visit of Prime Minister Modi.
You know, there are two things which are very clear, that this is a relationship which has seen a momentum like never before. And the roundtable that we hosted, clearly all the ambassadors, spelled it out that they've never seen this kind of momentum. In fact, so much so that Tim Romer, former US ambassador to India, told me that this is more hot ticket, the Prime Minister's state visit, than the Taylor Swift show, which is currently drawing huge crowds in the US. So, you know, the kind of support, the kind of momentum, and Biden administration is putting a big deal. President Biden himself has invested a big deal in creating this relationship to the next level. The kind of welcome that the Prime Minister is getting here, it's unprecedented. Very few world leaders get this kind of a welcome. He's hosting the Prime Minister, when he comes to Washington, D.C. for a private dinner, followed by, the state dinner that he's hosting. Kamala Harris and, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, they're hosting Prime Minister for a luncheon. The U.S. Congress, he's addressing. Obviously, he's only the second, only Prime Minister who's addressing the U.S. Congress for the second time. The Diaspora event, you see the outpouring of support that the Prime Minister had. Every Indian today across the political spectrum should be proud of the fact what the elevated relationship India enjoys. And this has come on the strength of a strong economic potential, strong diaspora connect, strong relationship that India and the US enjoy. A short while back, I was at a briefing by a senior White House official who told me in response to a question that this is the most consequential relationship that the U.S. will have with any country in the next 10 years. It's not about China. It's not about Russia. They will discuss difficult issues behind closed doors, but as mature friends, they will talk about every issue. It's people-to-people contact, educational links. There are 200,000 Indian students there in the U.S. Yes, Prime Minister will also raise the visa issue. Obviously, there are concerns in India's side that why is that there's a big delay for Indian professionals getting green cards in the U.S. India has been clubbed with China there. So that quota, that 7% quota has to go. So these are things which will come when the Prime Minister meets President Biden, but it's a holistic relationship. And I can tell you that this has etched out a new paradigm for Indo-US relations in years to come. And Prime Minister Modi gets a lot of credit in creating this whole momentum and creating this blueprint. And this is what you will see in the next, 2.5 days, 3 days, till the 23rd. Evening, the Prime Minister is here in the US.
Yes, thanks a lot for that perspective, Mr. Shukla. And also, we are getting live shots now of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's just about to arrive at his hotel in New York. Those are the shots that you just see on your screens right now. He's, of course, left the airport where he'd landed, and now he's at the New York Palace Hotel, and he's soon about to get out of that convoy and approach the lobby as we speak. There's a large contingent of members of the Indian community, the Indian diaspora in the United States, that's gathered outside the hotel premises to welcome the Prime Minister. His convoy has just reached the doors of the New York Palace Hotel, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be stepping out any moment now. Remember, this is a different location from the Waldorf Astoria that Prime Minister Narendra Modi had actually stayed when he visited the United States of America in the year 2015. So this is a different venue, but nevertheless, what's been a familiar sight in all of his overseas travels is the Indian contingent in large numbers gathering to welcome him there. And now, of course, you're seeing a large Indian presence outside the New York Palace Hotel, as well as Prime Minister Narendra Modi is soon about to step out of his convoy. He'll soon be making his way into the hotel and enjoy a very brief moment's rest before, of course, he begins to meet a series of CEOs and intellectuals who will, of course, be having engagements with him for the remainder of the day. And this is all, of course, also in the build-up to the grand Yoga Day celebrations that are being planned at the United Nations in New York tomorrow as well. But before that, lots of stakeholders, including business heads, Elon Musk among them, will be meeting the Prime Minister a bit later in the day. So it's a very brief interlude before those engagements actually begin. And now, of course, we're seeing security officials throng the venue and his convoy, and soon the Prime Minister will be stepping out and approaching the hotel lobby. It's taken him approximately 45 minutes to reach this venue from the time that he landed at the airport in New York. And like you can see on your screens right now, lots of Indians who've gathered outside the hotel premises to welcome the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. This is a familiar sight. This is, in fact, quite reminiscent of the greeting that the Prime Minister received when he landed in Japan not too long ago as well. And then, of course, when he proceeded to Australia to meet his counterpart, Anthony Albanese, there as well. And now, of course, he's in the United States of America for what is an official state visit. The first Prime Minister after, of course, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was at the receiving end of a state visit in 2009 at the time that Barack Obama was the Prime Minister of the United States. And then 14 years later, you see a similar distinction being accorded to Prime Minister Narendra Modi on what is his first state visit to the United States. And there, of course, you see the Prime Minister approaching the hotel. He's just stepped out of his vehicle, surrounded by security. and he's greeting members of the Indian community, Indian diaspora, who've gathered in large numbers there, holding both the Indian tricolour and the American flag to welcome him in New York. Now that's a closer view of the Prime Minister making his way towards the hotel, waving at the Indian crowd and members of the Indian contingent who've gathered at the hotel premises. Very similar to the interactions that he's had with members of the Indian community at the time that he was about to, in fact, reach his hotel in Japan as well, where he landed in Hiroshima not too long ago. And there, of course, he's now interacting very closely with members of the Indian community. We'll, of course, have to wait and see if he steps a bit closer and engages them in a conversation as well shortly before he reaches his hotel. But there is the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, after having reached his venue in New York, having left the airport where he landed almost 45 to 50 minutes ago. So there it is. Prime Minister Narendra Modi just met members of the Indian community, and now, of course, he's heading back, like we saw a short while ago, to the hotel. And thereafter, after a short break, he will be interacting with CEOs, members of the business community in the United States, and, of course, a lot of intellectuals as well. Among the people who will be meeting him will include Elon Musk, the CEO of Twitter, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an American astrophysicist, Paul Romer, the Senior Vice President of the World Bank, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who's an author and thinker, Ray Dalio, who's an investor, Fallu Shah, Indian-American singer, Jeff Smith, who's an author, Michael Froman, former U.S. State Representative. Let me, in fact, go across to Rishabh, who will, of course, take us through the Prime Minister's engagements as well. But Rishabh, from what we can see on our screens right now, the Prime Minister has reached his hotel, the New York Palace Hotel in the United States. It's taken him approximately 45 minutes to reach this venue from the JFK airport.
Definitely, it took him almost 45 minutes for a route that could have been covered in 20 minutes. This shows the amount of diaspora people who have been on road to have a glimpse of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. You know, we have heard chants of Modi, Modi, the moment the news broke that he has landed in New York. Now he has reached the hotel, but in last 45 minutes, since we have been in United States, the glimpse of what is on table for next 4 days is quite clear. Given the support that the Prime Minister commands globally among the Indian diaspora, is something that has become the image of India. Remember, US has 4.6 million strong Indian diaspora.
I just need to interrupt you there for a moment, Rishabh. We're getting live shots now of Prime Minister Narendra Modi from within the New York Palace Hotel. He's just made his way there a short while ago. Before that, of course, he had a very brief interaction with members of the Indian community who'd gathered outside the hotel to welcome him. Now, of course, he stepped inside the hotel, and we can see him there, flanked by security officials. This is inside the hotel lobby at the New York Palace Hotel in New York City. Almost 8 years ago, when he was in the United States, there, of course, having a bilateral engagement with President Barack Obama at that point in time, he was lodged inside the Waldorf Astoria. Now, of course, he's inside the Lot Palace Hotel in New York City. And again, he's been surrounded by members of the Indian community and well-wishers. This is inside the hotel lobby that we are speaking about. There's also heavy security presence, understandably so, around Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But there you can see him waving at members of the Indian community and stopping, like he normally does whenever he travels overseas, to have a short interaction with members of the Indian community. There you can see certain members also lucky enough to, in fact, be not just photographed with Prime Minister Modi, he's also signing autographs there as well, as you can see on your screens. This is all, of course, before he will be eventually taken to his room, where he'll probably enjoy a very short break before engagements with CEOs and other intellectuals and stakeholders actually begins. So this is Prime Minister Narendra Modi already having entered the New York Palace Hotel, briefly interacting with members of the Indian community there who've gathered in large numbers to meet him. So those are live visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the New York Palace Hotel. He landed at the New York JFK airport about 45 minutes to an hour ago. It took him quite some time to reach the hotel premises. Shortly before he entered the hotel, there was a large contingent of members of the Indian diaspora who were waiting outside for him for several hours. He did meet them very briefly before, of course, he proceeded to the hotel lobby. Now, of course,
उत्साह देखिए, लोगों के चेहरों पर खुशी देखिए, लोगों के चेहरों पर उत्साह जो है वो
विभिन्न धर्मों के लोग वहां पर पहुंचे हुए हैं।
जी, सेंस ऑफ बिलोंगिंग जो है ना इंडिया के साथ भारत के अंदर जो है लोगों की, ये और ये सिलसिला अभी आप देखिए अगले 3-4 दिन तक जहां जहां प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जाएंगे वहां आपको ये दिखाई देगा। महत्वपूर्ण बात क्या है कि चंद्रशेखर, जब प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी व्हाइट हाउस के अंदर जो बाइडेन के साथ मुलाकात करेंगे तो
अशोक, 1 मिनट रुकना चाहिए। ये आप देख सकते हैं, प्रधानमंत्री ऑटोग्राफ भी वहां पर दे रहे हैं लोगों को। तो बिल्कुल आप देख रहे हैं कि प्रधानमंत्री इस वक्त होटल की लॉबी के अंदर पहुंच चुके हैं और बड़ी संख्या में वहां पर लोग पहुंचे हुए हैं जो भारत से ताल्लुक रखते हैं।
Well, those are the shots that you see of Prime Minister Narendra Modi inside the New York Palace Hotel. A large number of Indians waiting to greet him there. Lots of members of the Dawoodi Bohra community as well. In fact, we played you a capsule not too long ago of members of the Dawoodi Bohra community from California extending their warm greetings to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So there he is, having entered the hotel premises, and now presumably he's being taken towards his room. Those are the visuals that you see on your screen right now. These are from a short while ago, approximately 5 minutes back, where he did interact with certain members of the Indian community outside the hotel. Let's once again listen into that interaction as well.
हार गए थे, 3-4 घंटे से खड़े हुए थे, लेकिन मोदी जी तो मोदी जी हैं, वो आए हैं, 1 बार 2 बार गए हैं और हमने भी हाथ मिलाया, पापा ने भी हाथ मिलाया, तो बहुत अच्छा लगा।
आपका कब आता है?
So Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in New York approximately an hour back. It took him a fair amount of time to reach the New York Palace Hotel, where he'll be lodged during his stay in New York today as well as tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, is the International Day of Yoga, where grand celebrations will take place at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. Once again, let's listen into the reactions that awaited Prime Minister Narendra Modi after his landing in New York.
आज यहाँ पे न्यूयॉर्क में आए और हम बहुत खुश हैं और हम यही चाहते हैं कि भारत विश्व गुरु बनेगा, इसीलिए हम अहमदाबाद से चलकर यहाँ तक आए। धन्यवाद।
So these reactions have been pouring in ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in New York. And we have Mr. Chirayu Thakkar with us. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Thakkar. But there is, of course, a lot of protocol and rituals associated with what is a formal state visit. This is therefore different from just another bilateral interaction between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. But do tell us about the substantive issues that are on the agenda beyond, of course, the distinction that Prime Minister Modi has now been accorded during this historic visit to the United States.
Yes, so you are right. This is a state visit. It is the highest form of a diplomatic engagement, and Prime Minister is on a state visit. But it is also very high on substance. So as I was mentioning earlier, US has shown a substantively costly signal, and they have agreed to a complete transfer of technology vis-a-vis the GE414 engine. There is already $191 billion of trade bilaterally, but both countries are trying to minimize and cut the red tape on both sides, also reduce the barriers vis-a-vis economic transactions, so that this number can meet its potential and maybe surpass the optimum potential, reach to perhaps even more than what India and China are trading right now. So this basically sends signals across bureaucracies on both sides of the divide that they need to work together, they need to work harder and find solutions to many issues. And this is a broad-based relationship which is not dependent on one or two issues. Perhaps every important issue, India and US has something or the other to share. And I'm sure when the final communique is out, it would touch a lot of areas, from trade to cyber to space to commerce, and of course defense and co-production, etc. But I think apart from substance, apart from symbolism, this visit is also very high on substance.
It's very high on substance, but let's also talk about symbolism for a short period of time, Mr. Thakkar, especially the kind of interactions, the public interactions that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has with members of the Indian diaspora. What we were told is that when it comes to somebody else who was the Prime Minister in the past, even prior interactions and bilateral visits that Indian Prime Ministers have had to foreign countries, engagements with members of the Indian diaspora were largely closed-door affairs. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi has added a completely different dimension to this equation with members of the Indian diaspora. Give us a perspective on that.
Yes, so you are right. Prime Minister Modi has made diaspora a big issue of his foreign policy. And as you can rightly see, and everybody else can see, from South Africa to Dubai to recently his engagement with diaspora in Sydney, and to the events like Madison Square Garden, Prime Minister always liked to create big events with diaspora.
Right.
Now, it makes his outreach more important. It makes people feel that, they are still a part of India's growth story.
Yes.
And Prime Minister has multiple objectives there. It helps him domestically to signal that how popular he is, and every politician thinks that way. There's nothing wrong with it. But apart from that, India also needs the talent. India also needs the support in terms of capital investments. So these are areas where diaspora can play a leading role. And apart from that, you also see that in a country like the United States, the bilateral ties, diaspora is very important part of it. If you read the documented stories of the nuclear deal, you see diaspora played a very important role even in those episodes, critical.
That's correct.
So
very heavily invested the Indian diaspora when it comes to the Indo-US relationship. You're right about that, Mr. Thakkar. Do stay with us. We'll have to slip into a short break right now. We'll come back with our coverage of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States on the other side.